Welcome to Corporate Culture, your podcast for cooperation, conflict, and culture at work. Today, I'm very pleased to have Nicolas Synnott on the podcast. He is a very good friend of mine, and he's currently the Chief of Staff at East African Power. That's a renewable energy company in Rwanda. And today, we want to talk with him about working culture, leadership, teamwork, and what we can learn from him, from his experiences on the African continent. So, Nicolas, thank you so much for being here. Welcome.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me. Very excited to be here.
So, first of all, where do I reach you? Where are you right now?
Yeah, so I'm currently in Kigali, in Rwanda. I'm actually coming from my house. The working day just finished, and it's been where I've been living and working for the last 2 years. I do have the privilege of traveling a lot, but this is what I call my base, my home.
Nice, nice. Yeah, we are very lucky to be in the same time zone. So no one of us had to wake up too early. I guess you also are in autumn now in Rwanda, right? Like, how's the weather?
Yeah, we actually don't have, we have only 2 seasons. So we have the dry and the dry season, the rainy season. So right now is the end of the dry season. We're very much looking forward to rain because it's very dusty and very hot, which we're not used to because Kigali is called the country of 1,000 hills. So it's usually a very temperate country, very pleasant. But now it's been very hot for last month. We're definitely feeling the effect of climate change, and glad to be working renewable energy, trying to make to make a difference in the climate fight.
Okay, yeah, yeah. So you just jumped into the topic. I wanted to ask you, yeah, maybe you can describe your current job. Like, what is your company doing, and what is your role in the company?
Absolutely. So I'm Chief of Staff at East African Power. East African Power is a renewable energy project development company. So what we do is we find opportunities to create new hydro solar power projects in different countries across Eastern and Southern Africa. And then we develop those projects. So the most common comparison is real estate. You know, when you do a real estate project, you need to buy the land, get the permits from the government, and then find people to rent or to buy either the offices or the condos, the apartments that you've built there. When energy is a bit the same context, you need to, first get government approvals, do all the studies to be able to build the power plants, then finance the construction, actually build it, and then operate it. And then what's specific about energy, and especially our business model, is that we sell our energy to the governments. The governments, we call the utilities, so the government company that buys the power from the producers and then sell it to their customers, so businesses and households like my house right here. So when I arrived, we were in 2 countries, mostly Rwanda, Uganda, had like 100 megawatt max in developments. And since I've joined, we've really grown the company to 8 countries and adding some every month, and close to a gigawatt of greenfield projects in development. So that's a bit about us. We're 140 staff. We were founded by a Canadian entrepreneur, Dan Klink, my boss, but started a company here. He lived here for 10 years. And this is where most of our staff is based here in Rwanda, but we also have some about 10% of the company that works remotely. But everyone works on their Rwandan time zone. So even me, when I'm heading back home to Canada next week, and I'll be waking up at 4 a.m. to to respect that commitment. So that's a bit about my company. We call EAP, so East African Power, and as Chief of Staff. It's a very interesting conversation because every chief of staff has a different kind of job description. In my case, it's a very executive role, so it's beyond just operation. So most chief of staff have a very operational role, but in my case, it's beyond that. It's at the intersection of kind of a chief commercial officer and a chief strategy officer. We're working very closely with our CEO. And I also lead everything that's so kind of my key focus are growth of the company, corporate fundraising. I support investor relations for financing of our projects. So in my industry, we have corporate financing and project financing, which is different specialties. So I support chief investment officer on the project financing. And then I also do whatever it takes. And I don't know if I can say these words in this podcast, but get shit done is my number one objective. So, the company has objectives, our CEO has a vision, and I try to be the glue between all the departments and the different parties to make things happen. I'm also the guy that they can be called at any day and say, hey, we need you tomorrow on the plane to go to this place to achieve this objective. Figure it out, figure out how you get there, figure out how you get it done. But, I love that excitement and this adventure part of my work. I've traveled almost 50% of the time across Africa, Europe, and North America. So our projects are in Africa, but our financiers are mostly in Western countries, so the United States and Western Europe.
Okay. Wow. Sounds very impressive. Sounds like a very tight schedule.
It's interesting.
Schedule.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah. So thanks even more for being on the show today. You told us that you have, I think 140 people, right, in your company?
Yeah,
I would be interested to know, like, who are the people that you work with, that you are the chief of staff of?
Yeah, so in my case, I kind of have oversight over the whole company. But in our case, and especially because we have a foreign CEO, and then most of our staff is Rwandan staff, or at least 95% is African staff. We have a managing director of the company who's Rwandan. So I think our managing director is really helping us translate decision made at the executive level, the senior management level, and make sure it's translated for the staff, because you'll first say found that, especially in our company, we have staff really at different levels. So you have kind of the local plant operators whose job is basically to, be there, big kind of at this intersection of security and maintenance. So kind of very vocational staff, who, just to give you perspective, maybe earn, $100 or $200 USD a month. And then there's kind of the executive where, we all have university degrees. We've worked, and around the world, and have kind of international standards in terms of management, work culture, work performance. So for me, I get to interact and work with almost all our staff, but then I get the support from our managing director from moving from, how could I say, objectives to execution. So I work most closely with the senior management team in coordinating them and following up with them. So of project management, so setting objectives, setting timelines, and following up, and giving people, authorizations and budget. But I also interact with a lot of the middle management who come to me for advice and different perspective. And then it's my role to also let people do their work, because as chief of staff, it's easy to fall in the trap of, well, let it do it myself, it's going to be faster. But if you think about the long-term perspective of sustainability of work, let people learn how to do their job and grow within their roles, so in the future they can do it themselves, right? So it's also about knowledge and skills transfer. And I think that's not because it's in Africa. I think that's just being a good boss in general in life.
Yeah. So how I understood it is that you kind of jump between the different levels, right? So with the senior management, but you also are in contact with the, let's say, like on the ground staff. So you kind of interact with all the different levels in a company, right?
Yeah, and what's interesting as chief of staff is you're no one's boss, but you're everyone's boss. So especially in my role, when I say chief of staff, so as I said, it's a very modular role. But in my case, when how could I say, if I make a decision and I say this is what we're going to do, it's recognized as a decision that was made, and I kind of speak on behalf of the CEO. But at the same time, I'll never tell someone what to do, because they have their own line of reporting, right? So no one reports directly to me, but then everyone reports to the top of the company in a way. So it's navigating those chains of command that requires a lot of EQ, of emotional intelligence. And for me, it's definitely my biggest strength. I don't have that many really hard skills, but I'm really good in terms of managing people and, navigating those relationships.
Yeah, that would be actually my next question is, I heard a bit that this emotional intelligence, like talking to different people, different interests involved, different levels inside the company. I would be interested to know, what are the things that you really like the most? Like, is it this like interaction with different levels, like getting out of your bubble, like not staying only in the senior management function, or like what is it that you enjoy most in your everyday work?
Yeah, I mean, so I think there's two things that what I enjoy the most about the work, but also about management. So I'll talk about work is that as someone who operates in energy developments and who, is in charge of developing new projects, I get to explore a lot of different environments and navigate them. So, one day I can be in the bush, on project sites, meeting a village chief who doesn't have a smartphone, doesn't have access to internet, doesn't have access to electricity. And the next day, I'm in the office of the president talking about how we want to invest the tens of millions of dollars into this country to bring more power to the economy, right? So it's to be able to navigate that. And then personally, or not personally, but as a company, our strategy to grow is to partner with local entrepreneurs across the countries where we operate, because they know best how to navigate the local relationships and business environments. So it's also about getting to connect with, how could I say, business elites within different countries and within different cultures. So I think dealing with all these different environments all the time really brings me a lot of joy and excitement. And then if you ask me in terms of management, I think in terms of management, I do like the contact with different people. Because especially, if you look, you need to recognize, and I probably should have opened with that, is that, I'm a foreigner. I come from a Western world. I'm a white man. And, there's a history that comes with the colonial history of Africa, right? And about white people, and especially white men, owning means of production and owning actually everything, with people having kind of a secondary citizen title, and people are used to, or not used, but historically there was this heritage of people having to obey to the white bosses, right? And you need to recognize when you're a foreigner, and especially a white foreigner operating in Africa, that you do come with this baggage. So for me, to be able to deconstruct this and recognize this and have open conversations, say, hey, I come to you as an equal, and I want to say equal, I still recognize that we're not equal, because I have privileges, I have economic privileges, I have passport privileges, I have an infinite amount of privileges, but my capacity to treat people humanly and care about them and say, hey, how can I help you be better at your job? How can you face any issues that company can support you? We try to be a very human and employee-oriented company, is really something that I find very meaningful, and that I extract a lot of value, because you can also learn a lot from, the field worker who does their job very well and understand working on the field in a way that I could never survive.
Right. Yeah, sounds like you have a very challenging job on many levels, actually. Yeah. And what you just said also about the colonial history and everything reminds me a lot of our discussions we had as students, because we studied together in Montreal many years ago already. Now that I think about it,
it's scary.
And and so that brings me to the question of, maybe you can explain how you got where you are now. So I remember when we studied together, you were just getting involved into the startup business, startup culture in Canada. And from there, you made it step by step, like over different other companies to the African continent. I know that you were there a couple of times. Maybe you can explain like your path from studying in Canada to working as chief of staff in Rwanda.
Yeah, it's a question that comes up a lot tonight. I never have the same answer, because I don't think I know myself how I got here exactly. But all I know is I've been curious about Africa for a long time. I think Canada, and especially Quebec, the province where I come from, has a lot of ties with the history of Africa, right? So our prime minister was very involved in putting an end to apartheid. Here in Rwanda, where there was the 1994 genocide, the commander of the UN forces was actually a Quebecer. So it's all different reasons why we were very aware, I find, more in other even nations, about some of the more like post-colonial history of Africa. And also, I think my youth was very focused on, all right, how can we help people who are not as privileged as we are, because of family values and mindset. And that brought my attention to Africa. And like, I was very naive back then. All I knew about was about famine, war, and had this very bad bias towards my perception of Africa. But what attracted me was that it was a region of the world that faced a tremendous amount of challenges. And I think that always stayed with me. And actually, when I first got into high school and university, I thought my path to maybe making a difference was through the NGO world or diplomacy, but I realized there was a lot of exploitation and very problematic dynamics within the industries. And my conclusion was, well, probably the best way to help is to not try to help and not go at all and just stay home. So actually, I had this kind of initial interest, lost interest, or removed myself from this space or this mindset. And then, as you said, discovered through my brother, who's a startup lawyer, the startup ecosystem in Canada, especially in Montreal. And I got a first internship in co-working space, and I just fell in love with the startup world, because there's two things. There's the tech world and the venture capital world, and the reasons is twofold. This first is the mindset. It's the mindset of solving big problems, of creating value, of being allowed to fail, and it's okay to fail. Try something, put something out there. If it doesn't work, move on. And the concept of scale, and that's more through technologies, that you can deploy a platform that can reach millions and hundreds of millions of people, or really have a meaningful impact on a problem, thanks to scalability of technology, right? It doesn't require more people, and we can circle back to that. But I think most people now are familiar with the concept of scalability of technology. And for me to be able to start with a small team, to be able to develop a solution can have a large scale effect, really attracted me. And as I discovered the startup world in Canada, I had already traveled to Africa for kind of volunteering first, which was crap, obviously. Volunteering, well, I learned a lot from it. I benefited a lot, but no one really benefited on the ground, so just as long as you're honest with yourself about that, I think it's fine.
I think you went to Tanzania, right? That was the first time.
Exactly, my first trip 10 years ago. Yeah, 10 years ago now. Yeah, it's amazing. And I've evolved tremendously since then, especially about my experience and also my responsibility as a white man, operating and living here in this environment. But all that to say that through university, because Montreal is francophone, has a lot of francophone schools. There's a lot of diaspora kids from the continent who come to study, and we have a lot of common friends who are from the diaspora. And through those, I had the opportunity to go do some internships in West Africa and Central Africa, to attend conferences, had some short-term contracts, and really kind of, as I learned about the startup world in Canada, I also started learning more about what was happening in Africa. And for me, I really respect founders, entrepreneurs, because of how daring they are, the amount of risk they take, and their vision. But then, there's no playbook for how to build a business successfully in Africa, versus in the West, especially North America, is a lot more track record. So for me, the entrepreneurs here are really even, pushing the entrepreneurship mindset to next level. They're like real hustlers, they're real champions, real crazy people. And it really attracted me. And, long story short, I launched my own venture capital fund in Canada called Front Row Ventures. I'm still on the board on it. We make early stage investments in tech companies in Canada. And I also, as I finished my university degree, my goal was to move to Africa to work with tech companies and startups. And so I finally did it in 2018. And I got my first job in Africa, in Uganda, where I worked as an investment associate for an impact investment fund. And
what is that like for sorry to interrupt, but if maybe people are not that familiar with these kind of terms, like, could you explain in easy words what that role was in Uganda that you did?
For sure. So our goal is to make somehow small investments into very early stage companies, so very young companies that were using technology to solve social problems in Africa. Okay. So the companies had to target what we call the bottom of the pyramid. So back then it was people earning $2 or less a day, families actually. So that had to be their customer base, and they had to be developing and trying to scale businesses that were going to solve or offer products and services to these communities, leveraging technology. Okay. So my role was to source companies, meet them, do research, analyze them, and then make recommendations to our investment committee to invest in companies that respected these criteria.
Right.
So we actually did that for almost 2 years. I was going to launch a spin-off fund. It means that we're going to like a fund associated to the company, but that was kind of now independent, with my boss then, who's a Kenyan woman, including Washira, which I love a lot and respect a lot, and I say hi if she's listening. But we launched our fundraising for that fund in February 2020, and a month later the world went to lockdown. So I lost my job. Long story short, because of COVID, like millions of people. I went back to Canada. No one was hiring, and I was like, I'm not going back to Canada. Still today, like, people who know me, when I left Montreal, was like, I'm leaving for 25 years, and it's probably going to be much longer than that. But it wasn't like I'm going to try. I was like, I know this is what I want to do. So I was very frustrated to be back where I started, after finally realizing, like, literally a lifelong dream of moving to work full-time and live full-time in Africa and Uganda then. So I waited because, no one was hiring during COVID, like everyone knows. And then the first person who offered me a job was my founder and CEO. He's like, I need someone to raise $5 million with me for the company and help me grow the company. And he's like, we went for a walk under the rain because everything was closed during COVID. And 6 months after being fired, and 2 weeks later, after meeting him, I was on a plane to Rwanda. And it was funny because of all the places, must be like, where do you want to go? I was like, not Rwanda. It looks so boring.
Okay.
But I actually really fell in love with the place.
Mm-hmm.
And, I didn't join as chief of staff. I joined as an investment associate, as I say, with the main mandate of raising capital for the business. And I'm sure we'll get to that. I found my CEO was so disorganized, and I saw, the beauty of doing investment is you meet so many entrepreneurs. So you get to learn about so many people and read about and learn about best practices that I felt like I could bring a lot to the company and to my CEO in terms of how to improve the structuring and organization of the company for efficiency and growth. So after 6 months with the company, I pitched him myself, like, hey, I think you need a chief of staff, and I think I should be this chief of staff. And he said, yeah, let's do it. And that's how I became. That was 2.5 years ago. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. So you have actually multiple stages, professional stages in Africa already that you went through. That's really interesting because I wanted to know more about your experience with the working culture. So we talked a lot about it on a personal level already. Of course, you cannot say that there's like an African working culture, even inside the countries, inside the different like technology sectors, it's different. But still, I would be interested to know from you, like coming from this Canadian startup culture, what was this feeling for you, like being thrown into like your first working culture, African working cultures in these different sectors? Thinking also about maybe your onboarding process, like starting in the company, like team building process. How did that feel different? And what was maybe the things that impressed you the most?
Well, there's a lot of things to say there. I think, it's the first time I worked in my life, by the way, for such a large organization. And you need to recognize the fact that there's different, how could I say, levels of labor, right? So there's the kind of daily worker, there's the laborer, there's the technically trained, and then there's the professionals, right? And within the professionals, you're those who come from what I call, and it's pejorative, right? Like, it's not the right way to say it, but I haven't still found the right word. And I think should be more open about this, about what I call very localized labor. So people who studied in their local university, consume mostly local media and, local culture, and haven't been necessarily exposed or trained with the best practices of how to be a competitive employee or staff in the global economy.
All right.
Right. And I think the truth, and I'm maybe some people from China, for example, would disagree, or India, but this culture is really much established by the West and mostly by the States, right? They're really kind of at the forefront of establishing modern working cultures. So there's kind of these people who are not necessarily, how could I say, trained we're trained and informed about these practices. And are a bit kind of what I'd say, like probably what the working culture was in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, right? It's like, all right, I gave you a task, you deliver this task, and then you come back to ask me, is it good? And what do I do next? And then there's kind of this other community that like, doesn't matter if they were trained locally or not, right? And I had this conversation like folks who went to the same university, graduated the same years, did the same programs, but one is what I call kind of a more local talent, and one who's a global talent, right? Could work in any company in the world. And they told me it's because they want those who are kind of this later category is because they exposed themselves. They went beyond what university gives, because really universities here don't prepare you for the modern economy. They're very much how schools used to be, where it's like, all right, the professor is always right. You don't ask too many questions. You stay quiet, have reverence. Don't teach you critical thinking. Don't teach you kind of all these skills about, around critical thinking, like, hey, I have an idea. How do I develop it? How do I defend my thoughts? All these elements that make kind of a staff independence and capacity to bring project forward and have debates. It's very much about what's it called, like rank, about hierarchy.
And
it's like, and then the more senior you are, the more right you are, and you'll get a lot of like, do you understand? Yes, even if they don't understand. Do you agree? Yes, even if they don't agree. And there's all these challenges about navigating this culture that's quite different. And I personally blame the university system, which I think needs to be modernized. And I think that's true in a lot of African countries, but that's what I've experienced in Uganda and Rwanda. So I don't know where I started. I got very, I'm very passionate about this topic, about how to train Africa is the youngest continent in the world.
Mm.
By 2050, half the population will be African. I think the average age in Rwanda is 18 years old. The average, like it's
Wow.
nuts. People are young.
Wow.
Like you need to find work for all these people, and there's not that much. The private sector is not that big. So like a lot of this workforce, like in India, it happened in India and China, will be working for global companies, and we
Mm.
need to prepare this workforce for being able to work and compete and operate in these norms and expectations, but the universities are not doing that work. So
Mm.
anyways, when I
Mm.
arrived, and like I think I was already aware of that because of different experiences, but seeing it here made me, I had to be very intentional about how I deal with my staff, right? And how I communicate differently and have different expectations with different people. And that's where also having a Rwandan managing director helps a lot in terms of
Mm.
being able for like our Rwandan staff will never come to me with their problems because I'm not Rwandan, and they speak to
Okay.
me in their second language.
Yeah.
That's the key thing. English is their second language. So,
Mm.
or French, because in Rwanda too, that just change of official language from French to English in around 2010, right?
Mm.
So it's hard to like go and express and share about your concerns and challenges in your second language that you're not necessarily the best at, right? So there's also this language component. And then you also need to adjust your expectations. The variation in salaries and compensation are huge. So the person who's paid, $2,000 to $5,000 US net, that's probably all in the same bracket of talents, but just in
Mm.
different experience level. So you can communicate and operate with the same expectations, the same norms,
Mm.
and versus people who win 200, 300, even $600. You cannot expect the same thing out of them. It would be unfair. Like if you think about the concept of capitalism and just labor is you get, compensation in cash and other benefits for labor, for work, for hours, right? So, if you're a laborer in this case, you get a task and you deliver that task. You shouldn't expect from these people, initiative, creative thinking, problem solving.
All
It's
right.
like, no, you have the skill and you execute on that skill. So
Yeah.
like learning how to navigate this, but also to not stay that, because you can say, oh, these are not competent people, they cannot grow beyond. It's like, no, you can also train them and elevate their game. And our managing director is very passionate about
Mm.
training the next generation of talents. And how do we do that internally? And how do we
Yeah.
sit down and invest our time? Because that's the only way you can do that is coach them,
Yeah.
right? So how do I not stay stuck in that mental conception of who's capable of what? Like everyone is talented. The
Yeah.
talent here is huge. Just not everyone had the same access to education, opportunities, and coaching, right?
I see. What stuck in my brain was what you
So
said before about these hierarchies. That, like, how I understood it, it's very much vertical. Whereas, like in the West, North America, Europe, now there's this big celebration of like horizontal structures, like low hierarchies and so on. That's how I understood it. That like in the working cultures that you knew, like people were expecting from you also as a chief of staff, as a leader, as a team leader, to be more to communicating maybe also more vertically than horizontally, right?
yeah, 100%. But
Mm.
then I feel that's the expectation, because that's also they don't feel like it can be surprising if I behave in an other way. So it's
Okay.
also my role, because if you come from like the banking industry, from you work for the public sector, that's really how it works, right? But then for us, like we are a business that integrates Rwandan working culture and African working culture with Western Canadian working culture. So it's on me to communicate my difference of expectation. Is like, hey, you're in charge of this. Don't come to me for the solution. We can discuss the problem. I'll brainstorm. But what research, it's on me to say, I expect you to do the work and to come with those problems. I know you can do it, and to empower them and to give them confidence too. So I think that's where there's breaking that culture of hierarchy also is my responsibility. And I cannot just hope it happens and then expect it happens. I need to give people the opportunity and the tools to operate in what my expectations are in terms of working culture.
Yeah,
Just super quickly, you
of
asked me
course.
what I like the most
Yeah.
is how people care about each other. I've never
Mm.
seen anything like it. Every birthday celebrate with a gift, with a cake, and people sing. And like it just comes from the other staff, right? It's not like HR doing it. It's community. There's a baby, there's a death, there's a wedding. And here it's natural. It's like you don't take holiday for these things. You're just allowed, you just send your staff to go support and be there for good situations and bad situations. And how much does social component of caring for the others are involved in are integrated into the corporate business and doesn't treat people just as money printing machines. I find that very refreshing. That human component of being colleagues is really, really good, really refreshing.
Could be an inspiration also for I think the Western working world, because the companies I know, a lot of them, like, you have to organize your own like goodbye party and like everything, like you have to do it yourself. People will not like do it for you.
Yeah.
Still, I can imagine that sometimes there might be also conflicts, or at least conflicts of interests, maybe also personal conflicts. I know it from my experience in the renewable energy sector, in the public sphere. So there's obviously some conflicts maybe with neighbors, with local people living close to infrastructure projects and so on. And there's also the internal conflicts, obviously, that you have in every organization. Maybe you can share some like short insights about maybe the differences you felt, how you deal with conflicts externally, internally, compared to what you know from North America.
Yeah, I'd say for external conflict is very easy. Is I'll never get involved because I don't have the cultural capacity to manage them, because especially infrastructure projects in very remote and rural areas, there's all codes and concepts and traditions that needs to be respected. And it's not for me. We have staff that we hire to specialize in that and recognize that as a Westerner, as a foreigner, there's things I cannot do. And this external conflict resolution, especially with like when starting to land, I can't manage. If it's government related and it's with professionals, it's a different context. But even that, if it's related with governments, we'll usually go with a local partner, either an employee or a business partner. In terms of internal conflicts, look, it's interesting because I have to be careful myself. Like I lose it sometimes, right? Because of high expectation, high stress. And like for me as chief of staff, one of my key job is to also keep my CEO accountable. And sometimes I lose on him and be like, what you're doing doesn't make sense. And it's normal, right? A CEO is alone at the top. They need someone like that. And he appreciates when I lose on him because it keeps him in check. But when I do that with my staff, they really don't respond at all. They're like, they smile, they find excuses, and they don't appreciate the conflicts. So I think for me, it's also, I think, the leadership role. Because of so much hierarchy, people expect you not to lose it. It's not like, you're not equal. It's like, no, it's how do you deal with this is like sitting down, post-mortem, bringing someone who can help mitigate, especially because of the cultural codes, as I said, right? So bringing my managing director and said, hey, I had these expectations of you. You didn't deliver. What happened? These are my frustrations, and discuss them. Sometimes I even need translation, right? As something that can happen. But also I think it's important to say, look, my frustration is not with you as a person, is with you as a colleague, and where those frustrations didn't happen. And I think, it's interesting in my job, we have like the commercial arm that's very kind of commercial minded and very like, comes from business background. And you have the engineers who build the power plants are about perfection and think they're always right. And that's where I find the biggest conflict, interestingly. It's not in culture like Rwandan Canadian, is in the culture of profession.
Yeah.
Like the clash between the commercial team and the engineering technical team are constant, because we just don't communicate on the same level. And there's a few people in the company who are actually able to bridge that gap because they have some technical know-how, so they got respect from the engineers. And you have to understand that speaking to them, trying to make them acknowledge they made a mistake will never work, because I find that engineers, a lot of them have a lot of ego. So, and it's just, I think it just comes to a profession of like pride, and they know they learn a lot, they've done great things, and I respect that. And then they don't necessarily have the same appreciation for my world because they think everyone can do it. Because, I didn't need to do a bachelor of business to do it, which is fine, right? But I need to acknowledge that there's no point in trying to argue with them. It's better to have this person who I communicate to, who then can communicate to them, and dealing with that. And I think my last point from conflict is walk away. Just take the time. When you're pissed is not the right time to address conflict. And I need to learn that better. Like, it's okay. Leave work, go to the gym, go blow off some steam, call the day off, wait for you to like move on. Because at the end of the day, work conflict is never life or death. And if there's a conflict, whatever consequences have already happened. So it's not like you can change it. Like, all right. Or if you can, focus on the solution, take a step back, then come back to it. And I think regardless of culture, that's true, right?
Right. That's very good advice. I think that's something we should all remember and try to implement more. Yeah.
Yeah, I should do that myself too.
Right, right. But it's good that you're aware of it yourself. So it's I think it's a very important first step. We're coming to the end of the podcast. We have one last topic I want to address, and you mentioned it already. It's the leadership. And I would be interested, especially for non-African listeners, maybe who are listening to the podcast. What are the things that, according to you, non-African leaders, team leaders, organizational leaders, could learn from the leadership culture in the African countries and companies you worked in? Do you have some specific examples of what you say, like this is something non-Africans could like implement and copy?
Yeah, I'm going to say something maybe a bit controversial, and I won't talk about my company, but the country. You know, Rwanda in 94, so 30 years ago, was, you know, complete disarray. And President Kagame, you know, has been the leader since, and I've, you know, brought peace and reorganized the country and brought prosperity. And Rwanda is really in a high growth. It's really impressive how the country's developing fast. You know, it's safer than most countries I've been to in the West. Infrastructure is amazing. Talent development, it's a work in progress, but it's coming there. He's accomplished so much with his government and all the people around, but it's also the importance of sharing a vision and saying, look, this is where we'll be, and showing that you believe in it, and then leading by example and saying, you know, not tolerating behaviors and not expecting from others what you do yourself. You know, he always say, like, look, it's not because you have position of power that you need to cheat the system or benefit from it. If there's a line, go to the back of the line like anyone else, and you know, step by step. And also, you know, if I don't think I would have had the vision to see to believe that they brought Rwanda to where it is today in 94, right after the genocide, right? I don't think I would have been daring enough, but he believed in it, and his people around him believed him, and he convinced them, and he gave them responsibility to convince people below, but he also involved the whole population. I mean, everyone should read about how the peace building process post genocide, because I think it's a real lesson in leadership and inclusion. But I think that's what I find the most interesting is believe in a vision, communicate it, lead by example, and involve everyone from the lowest level of your company, or in this case, the country, all the way up. And especially the people at the top, keep them the most accountable, and expect the best out of people. Don't have tolerance for mediocrity. And if people are not delivering, hold them accountable in public and say, right, this person didn't deliver. We asked them to step down because ABC. And this was the expectation that wasn't there. And this applies to everybody in this company. And for each person, you should have clear expectations and communicate those expectations clearly. And if those expectations are not met, have a discussion. Is it unrealistic? Because especially in startup, you know, you're not always sure what's going to happen. Right. Or is it because the person didn't do their job? And if that's the later, then have consequences. And I think that's very key in leadership as well.
Right. Thank you very much, Nick, for your insights. It was very interesting for me. I hope it was also interesting for, especially for our non-African listeners. Maybe you also found some inspirations, some new insights into working, into cooperating, into resolving conflicts at work. I wish you all the best for your future steps on the African continent or elsewhere. And thank you again very much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Paul. I love this idea of this podcast and looking forward to hearing what your other guests have to say. Thanks for having me.